to me like we might be live. Cortney,
All
are
right.
we live?
We are live. Yep, we're up. We're live.
Well, I think this is many of our first Facebook Live. So folks, please bear with us, and hopefully we can have a productive conversation today. So hello, everybody. Good morning for the folks on the West Coast. Good afternoon for the folks on the East Coast. Thank you for joining us for our live event today. We're excited to be here and welcome you all to the conversation entitled Activate the Vote, What's at Stake for Youth Justice in the 2020 Election. Today is National Voter Registration Day, so we thought it was the perfect opportunity to talk about how this election really impacts the issues that we all work on every day to try to transform youth justice. I'm excited and honored to be here with many of our colleagues from the network, and I want to start by introducing everyone, and then we can jump right into conversation from there. So we'll start with our NJJN organizational members. First for our members, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, we've got Kent Mendoza, Manager of Policy and Community Organizing and Youth Activist, Sophia, Cristo. ARC works to end mass incarceration in California. To ensure our communities are safe, healthy, and whole, ARC empowers formerly and currently incarcerated people to thrive by providing a support network, comprehensive reentry services, and opportunities to advocate for policy change. From our member Kentucky Youth Advocates, we've got Jessie, Whitish, Chief Engagement Officer, and Courtney Downs, Policy and Advocacy Director. Kentucky Youth Advocates pushes for policies that give children the best possible opportunities for a brighter future and are making Kentucky the best place in America to be young. From our member, the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, we've got Clark-Rizzio, Executive Director of the LCCR. LCCR is a nonprofit law office that defends young people in Louisiana's justice system through both direct representation and policy advocacy. We're also really excited to have one of our alumni members from our Youth Justice Leadership Institute, Rashad Hawkins, who's the founder and director of BMore Awesome Incorporated, which engages in art activism in Baltimore. BMore Awesome Inc. works to address inequity in the United States of America through the dynamic intersection of arts, activism, and entrepreneurship, in science, technology, engineering, art, and math, so STEAM, projects to empower youth most directly impacted by systemic issues of inequity. We've got a full house, so we've got a few more folks. We're really grateful to have representation from our national partner, Youth First Initiative, which seeks to end youth incarceration by closing youth prisons. We're joined by Jill Ward, who is Youth First Senior Policy Consultant and author of Your Voice, Your Vote, which is a really awesome toolkit that was published by Youth First. Also here with me from NJJN is my support, Courtney McSwain. She's our communication strategist who will be checking Facebook for questions and comments from folks that might happen to want to ask and engage with us. So please feel free to join in on the conversation on Facebook in the comment section, and we'll bring some of those questions to the floor and see if we can get some answers for you guys. I want to thank everybody for being here before we really get going here. Let's start by just creating a bit of context and kind of getting a sense of where youth justice fits into the conversation around voting decisions right now. Jill, you developed the Youth Justice Toolkit, which is awesome. It's called Your Vote is Your Choice, a toolkit for youth justice and electoral advocacy. It's a great resource that really breaks down all the ways that advocacy organizations can be involved in the electoral process, from knowing the rules about lobbying to how to influence the public conversation during an election. My question to you, Jill, is, I really wonder if you could be kind enough to kind of set up the stage for us right now by sharing your thoughts on why youth justice advocates should really be engaging in electoral advocacy, and what's the easiest way for folks to kind of jump into the realm if they haven't done it before.
Sure. Thanks, Ricky, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this awesome conversation on National Voter Registration Day. I think, Dr. King said that voting was the foundation of political action, and we couldn't be feeling that more right in this moment. And so I think now more than ever, we need to see voting and organizing, turning out voters who care about youth justice is incredibly important in this election. But I think what I'd like to also say is it's important in every election. And one of the messages I would really hope comes from this conversation today is it's not just in big electoral years like this one, which it certainly without question is, but it's every election at every level. You have DA races, you have school board elections, you have city council elections. All of these local leaders in your community make decisions that influence what happens to young people in those communities, whether it's about resource allocation, whether it's education, or whether it is decisions like a DA makes about charging or the kind of restorative justice projects they might buy into with their own budgets. So it's really important, I think, for those of us that want to see safer, freer, more just communities to really look at those races, understand who's making those decisions, and make sure that people who care about what those decisions look like turn out and exercise their right to vote. And I would say to the second part of your question, if you haven't done this before, you don't, I know scrappy grassroots nonprofit organizations are like, I'm already doing all kinds of legislative advocacy and grassroots organizing. And I mean, like, how can I get into voting, doing voter registration and getting voter turnout and doing GOTV things? And my answer to that would be, this is part of the reason we put the toolkit together. There are lots of organizations that do a lot of this voter registration and GOTV and education work, and you should try to plug in with those groups. There are youth organizations like Campus Vote Project, the Alliance for Youth Action does a lot of voter registration, the League of Women Voters, which I am locally involved in here in my own state, does a ton of voter registration and education, completely nonpartisan, and you can plug into that. You can help plug into their organizing efforts and bring your message of why voting is important to those activities. And that is an easy way to try to get, I think, engaged in some of this voting stuff where you don't have to organize it yourself or be an expert to be able to really take advantage.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill. Many of us who are deeply involved in this work understand the interconnectedness of our work and how it relates to many other issues in our society. Do you think that youth justice is on the radar of voters when it comes to making decisions around the election? And what are your thoughts on why or why not that might happen to be?
Well, not enough, for sure. I mean, our policies sort of tell us that it is not as high a priority as it needs to be. But I would also say that it depends. I think, again, taking it down to the local level, there are some jurisdictions where youth justice is very much at the forefront of the conversation in those communities and very much something that people are paying attention to. So I think, it's a both and kind of answer. I think there's always more work to be done, but I do think, and we may hear from some of that from some of the other folks on this call, where youth justice really is a major electoral issue in a community around a governor's race, a mayor's race, a DA race. So I think it's important to just always think about it in those terms and not just in terms of what is the overall national dialogue, where sometimes it's hard to get oxygen. It's really maybe more important more locally to make it a priority for some of those races, and not so much the president necessarily, but as I keep saying, some of these other down races on the ticket where big decisions are being made that are impactful.
That's right. There are plenty of down ballot candidates to support, plenty of down ballot issues to consider, and we want to really make sure that folks understand that. Let me open this up to the rest of our members and ask a couple other questions here. I'll start with Aaron. Aaron, what's the landscape right now in Louisiana, and is youth justice on the radar for voters?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. It probably won't surprise anyone that right now the landscape is really defined by COVID concerns. And a lot of the debates are sort of just replicating many of the national debates related to partisan politics. I'd also say, though, that there's a big disconnect between the major metropolitan areas in our state and the more rural areas, because in the major metropolitan areas, community members and grassroots organizations have really helped push politicians and candidates to engage with how we're treating young people. And so because the juvenile legal system is defined by racism and racial inequality, most people seem to understand that the movement for Black lives includes a movement for youth justice. Because we so disproportionately arrest and jail and incarcerate Black children, people are paying attention to this. And this is in stark contrast to where we were, at the beginning of this year, where we were in a totally different landscape, where car burglaries were on the rise and there was increasing fear of teenagers and juvenile crime was a hot button issue. And now voters are are talking about community safety and including Black children in that, and including the threat of violence from the state as a major concern. And so we're really seeing that shift. You know, the presidential election is a done deal in Louisiana. There's not much competition in that area in Louisiana. But as you pointed out, the election and people's engagement in politics is incredibly heightened right now. And so it's a time where we can educate voters, we can educate potential supporters, not only to get out to the polls in November and we'll have runoffs into December, but also beyond, and demand accountability from whoever does get elected this fall.
That's right. Those are great points. Cortney and Jessie, what are things looking like in Kentucky in terms of youth justice in the election?
Yeah, so I think I think things are a little bit similar here. You know, obviously the conversation has been largely monopolized by COVID, and you know, for people who live in Louisville, like Jessie and I, there's the Breonna Taylor case that's kind of front and center for everyone. So I think youth justice is kind of interwoven in a lot of that. And I know, like at KYA, we've been very intentional about trying to keep that in the conversation, but it may not always be front of mind for everyone. What I can say for us is that, you know, our advocacy efforts have largely included lobbying in the state legislature. So, and also like educating the general public about issues that positively impact youth and families more broadly. So we focus on youth justice, but we're also looking at, you know, education and economics and child welfare, health related issues as well. And so we've really tried to kind of lean into our role as the conveners. So one of the things that we're trying to do is, or not trying, one of the things we're actually doing is hosting these virtual candidate forums. And so what we're able to do is bring in the candidates, bring in the incumbents, bring them together and discuss an array of topics. And so that will include questions around youth justice. So looking at like the racial disproportionality that we're seeing in the youth justice system and asking these candidates or these incumbents, like, what is it that you know, what can you do or what do you plan to do to address these issues? Looking at status offenses, looking at kids who are you know, disproportionately potentially having like their cases sent to adult court. So kind of having those questions front and center along with all of the other issues that we're talking about. And I also think that we've been somewhat fortunate in the past in that justice in Kentucky is, you know, for some people maybe surprisingly, a largely bipartisan issue. So our hope is that we'll continue to see that progress regardless of who's elected, especially on like the national level.
Thank you. Jessie, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I have nothing that I can add to Cortney's great comments. So not, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both. I appreciate all the answers so far. Kent and Sophia, actually, how about LA and California more broadly?
Thank you. I'll quickly introduce Sophia, let her introduce herself, and then I'll pivot it to me. Is that cool? Or...
Yes, please. I love additional introductions. It's great.
Go ahead, Sophia.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm with ARC, Anti-Recidivism Coalition, as a youth advocate. I recently came home about a month ago after being incarcerated for 10 years, so I have a lot to say when it comes to juvenile justice. In all honesty, I feel there's not enough on people's radar when it comes to juvenile justice until it's close to elections. So I feel people need to be more aware of like what goes on and stuff like that instead of waiting till it's close to elections and people don't have a proper understanding or have enough input to be able to make like a proper decision on things that they vote on.
I think that's a great point in terms of just being informed about the candidates and the issues that impact young people and juvenile justice more broadly. So I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for that, Sophia. Kent, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I think I agree with Sophia on that. As far as in LA County, in LA, there's a lot of movement going on right now. I think the main thing locally that I'm really excited about and happy that it's happening. It's that LA County is exploring to move. It's already working on moving all of LA County's youth, they're currently under the probation departments, LA County's probation department, which is over $1 billion budget department, to basically move them out of this department into another department that will be focused on youth diversion and development, care, health, wellness, health, and all of those things that the probation department doesn't have to offer. So I think that is very important. That's what's at stake and what the local level and what's happening really major, because we're talking about youths and the future of the youth in LA County. So that's what is happening right now. And also, and in California, Governor Gavin Newsom recently, wants to close the prisons, youth prisons, right? The state youth prisons, which are called divisions of juvenile justice. And in the local level, the counties are going to have to be responsible in figuring out how to create an alternative to these youth prisons, which are the prisons where all the youth that were convicted for whatever crimes and they went for years, 20 years, 30 years, they're being sent to these prisons or whatever. So every county has the opportunity to create its own alternative to this, right? And LA County has already moved forward on doing this by also, the same group that is designing how to move all youth from probation into another department. They are also going to be designing how to move all of, how to create an alternative to these youth prisons that is not going to be the same. So that's really what's happening. And a lot of voting stuff too. I think there's a proposition around voting stuff happening in the state and in the local level. ARC is really working on really getting people registered to vote too. So we're doing a lot of local voter engagement work as well. But those are the two major things related to youth justice that I would say that are really big happening in LA County.
Thanks, Ted. I want to pause for a second. Sophia, I just want to welcome you home. I don't know that I knew it was so recent since you've gotten home, but welcome home, and we appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing your time and your experiences with us today. So just wanted to do that for Sophia before we go on to Rashad. Rashad, how about Baltimore and Maryland?
So Baltimore is a interesting situation. Youth organizing and advocating for change within the system as it relates to young people is something that has always been on the forefront. There are several organizations here. Many are youth-led. Some of them are policy organizations. Some do grassroots organizing and the policy work. So in Baltimore, it's pretty much like youth are, for the most part, always pushed at the forefront. We've already had our primary elections, and it's pretty much a blue city. So whoever wins the primaries locally is pretty much going to win. Young people from organizations such as Heart Smiles, Community Law in Action, Baltimore Algebra Project, they've hosted their own forums where they have brought up the issues that are most important to them. Youth justice was in there, but that goes across education, arts, like those different type of things, where they've already mayoral candidates and different potential elected officials or candidates. They have already talked to them and let them know the things that they wanted to see them work on if they were elected into office. On the state level, the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's happening with COVID has definitely been helpful as it comes to raising awareness and changing public opinion about certain things, because once you go to Annapolis, there's different counties that are represented. Many of these counties lean more further to the right. Many of these counties are very pro-police, and a lot of these different committees, when you're pushing progressive legislation, you have to essentially deal with the folks that want to go in the other direction. With that being said, there are a lot of organizations, BMore included, Advocates for Children and Youth, ACLU, Public Justice Center, that every session they're pushing for legislation that would change anything from bail reform to ending the automatic charging of youth as adults. The justice, the way we look at it sometimes is that justice, education, those different type of categories. But for the most part, a lot of these things blend into each other as far as the school to prison pipeline, things like that. So even with school police, that's something that BMore has worked on locally and on a state level. But that's something that folks are looking at going into legislative session as we're like at the defund police, like that movement is at its height. As far as voter registration and things like that, like, you know, a lot of organizations are always doing that. I'm not saying like, you know, some sort of like big push or big collective push where we're using like a hashtag or something like that, that we're pushing like vote youth justice to the forefront. But the organizations themselves, the independent organizations, are always working on getting information out there and mobilizing folks to vote and also be included in the legislative process so that the policies that are being formed and being pushed for are informed by those directly impacted, so it would be the most correct thing for the people that it would impact. So.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds exactly right. Thank you. I know that many of you all are working on voter engagement efforts. Cortney and Jessie, Kentucky Youth Advocates put out a voter toolkit. What was your goal in putting that out? And why did you all decide to put out that toolkit? And what impact are you hoping it will have? And I know this is a long series of questions here, but has it helped to put youth justice in the election conversation?
Yeah, so part of the impetus for putting together that toolkit was we noticed there just wasn't a lot of electoral advocacy on behalf of kids going on, especially kind of multi-issue electoral advocacy. This was not, this was our first ever electoral advocacy toolkit. So this is not something that we have done a lot of, but it seems more important than ever to do that, you know, engaging of voters and engaging of, you know, either elected officials or candidates, because to Sophia's point, you know, the election is an opportunity to start the conversation, but we hope that this conversation continues long after election season. So with that toolkit, we really wanted it to be like a conversation starter. We kept it really simple for a reason, which was so that it could be really accessible to folks who maybe haven't done electoral advocacy in the past, for voters to educate themselves when it comes to data and issues, whether that's local races, like Jill mentioned. We have a lot of state races going on. And then, of course, we have a very high profile Senate race here, along with other federal races. So in that toolkit, we link to we're the Kids Count grantee for Kentucky. So we link to all of the data related to kids and families down to the county level. And that includes, one of those data indicators is youth who are incarcerated. So that becomes one of those topics that we want voters to educate themselves on, and then start asking their candidates, asking their elected officials about, to really lift that up as an issue. We want this to be relevant for both rural voters and for urban voters, because much like Aaron and Rashad mentioned, we have that really kind of urban rural divide. We know that youth justice is something that comes up no matter where you live, but trying to make this as accessible as possible. And we also have an emphasis on race equity in the toolkit. So one of the questions is, what would you do for all Kentucky kids? So not just what kids look like in your county, in your district, but for kids who live somewhere differently, who are differently able, of a different race. So trying to get candidates to think about, if I'm running for a statewide race, for example, how am I addressing all kinds of kids? And we are looking, as Cortney mentioned, at like a whole child, whole family approach with this toolkit. And we hope that sort of shapes elected officials' thinking, because yeah, youth justice is not like an isolated issue. Of course, that's, you know, so deeply rooted in so many other inequities that we want to have that be you know, lifted up within this. And as Cortney mentioned, we're also having some candidate forums for state level races. Some of those incumbents are Democrats, some are Republicans, but then we have their challengers, and we are hoping to have some federal conversations with candidates as well. So we're trying to accomplish a lot, but we hope that it is just the beginning.
That's awesome. That sounds great. Cortney, did you have anything to add before we go on to our next question?
Not a thing.
Okay, thank you. Jessie was very comprehensive, I can understand. Kent and Sophia, can you tell me what the Anti-Recidivism Coalition is doing in California and LA, specifically around voter engagement?
Yeah, I could tell you what we're doing. Well, I mean, ARC, we are part of a coalition called Free the Vote, LA Free the Vote. We're part of two coalitions. One called Free the Vote California is the state coalition, right? And then one in the local level called LA Free the Vote. It's called the same thing, but they're completely different campaigns. And in 2018, ARC partnered with a bunch of other organizations and kicked off LA Free the Vote, right, in the county jails. And that the goal of that campaign was to, the board of supervisors they put a charge to get as many system impacted people who are on probation or who are just system impacted registered to vote in the communities and in the county jails. So that kicked off in 2018, and since then we've been doing that to now, right? And that ties up with our state work, because in our state work we've been working we're working on Proposition 17, which is basically, if it gets passed on November 3rd this year, it will basically restore the voting rights to approximately 50,000 Californians who currently cannot vote because they're out in the community on parole. And this is only for people on parole, not the people in prison at the moment. So it's, it's a lot of people, a lot of people that have been out in the community sometimes for 2 years, 3 years, even 5 years on parole, 10 years, and they still can't vote because they have parole conditions. So, that's a big one. And what we're doing at the local level is just, we've been doing our voter engagements. We just did one last week on Saturday. Our executive director actually managed to, pull together like a group of 30 ARC members or so, or like a good chunk. And they went to Compton to do voter engagement, educating people about why it's important to vote. And then in strategically in media strategy, some of the things that we're doing are in our social media, because we do have like thousands of people that follow us, and we kind of have pivoted to engaging voters directly on supporting our proposition, which is Proposition 17, 25, and against Proposition 20, which will undo a lot of reforms. And basically, we're using our social media to just keep telling stories and letting people know why voting is important, and tying it to our state stuff, because a lot of our members, a lot of us haven't voted in the past, and when we have, sometimes some of our members are going to vote for the first time this year. I believe Sophia, she's gonna vote for the first time this year, right? Sophia, I might be wrong, but like those are experiences that not a lot of us get to have, and this is why policy change, grassroots level, anywhere, it's important, because if we don't do none of these things, people like Sophia, maybe in the past with punitive laws and policies, maybe she would have never been able to vote if she got out of the system because of the conditions. But because we have made some progress throughout the years, some people are able to vote now versus in the past, a lot of people. And this started with Martin Luther King. This is a big movement. We're talking about a movement that has been on forever, So, but yeah, that's some of the things that we're doing. I don't know if you have anything to add, Sophia. If you think I miss anything, but yeah.
No, that's huge. And, I can't help but say that, if it didn't matter, certain folks wouldn't go out of their way to make it so hard for people to vote, especially after they have been released and have done their time. There's a reason why there have been efforts at many levels to disenfranchise and not allow people to vote.
Can I quickly say something? 30 seconds real quick. Another thing that I think it's a strategy that every other people should do in other states and everything around the strategy is, we have a newsletter that goes inside prisons all around California for us. And our newsletters reaches people that are incarcerated, right? And to inform them about the propositions, about the bills. And a lot of them really want to know what's happening because they give them hope. It gives them hope, while they're in prison or wherever they're at. So one of the things that we're also doing is encouraging people inside prisons to encourage their family members to go out and vote, because how these policies will impact their lives. So if you have 20,000 people in this one prison, and out of those 20,000 people, they tell their family member that has 10 people or 5, you're right there you're engaging, they are advocating from inside by telling their family members to vote. So that's another strategy that we've been doing at ARC.
That's right. And there's an inherent understanding of how important it is to vote when you've got a family member who's literally inside depending on a vote to kind of change policy to allow a person to be able to integrate successfully into society. So I definitely agree with that, Ken. Thank you for raising it. Aaron and Rashad, are there specific voter engagement activities that you guys are working on at your respective organizations?
Yeah, so BMore, some ink. Our biggest thing is starting in early October, we're going to do a pretty much big push targeting those directly impacted in the most impacted communities. Right now, because of COVID and also capacity and resources, it's looking like it's going to be mostly through social media and peer-to-peer, connecting with folks at our base who are directly connected to the community to make sure that in the weeks leading up to the election, because people like, they have like I don't want to say short-term memory, but it's kind of like, if you start probably like 2-3 months out with this, and then keep it going consistent, they might get bored of it, even if it is getting hammered in their head. But a few weeks out, and being creative in the way that you're getting it to them, and emphasizing the importance of it. And again, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the stuff that was happening around George Floyd, voter registration went up. Folks are already looking forward to voting this election, so it is not as challenging as it usually is. But again, just with the way that we're pushing it is like, don't overwhelm them, don't bore them, and emphasize the urgency, inform them in ways that are digestible and not too dense, and then mobilizing folks the best way that we can to vote on election day.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I mean, the attention span sometimes can be challenging, but that sounds like a good timing schedule for stuff. Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to share about specific voter engagement activities you guys are working on?
Yes. We have been working with a coalition of other youth justice advocates, some parent organizing groups here in Louisiana, specifically in Orleans Parish. And we put together a platform for youth justice that we actually launched today with a socially distant press conference and rally in front of one of the youth detention centers here. And we really wanted to put forth a vision of what we saw as what is necessary and what deserved for the children in New Orleans. And we're asking political candidates if they will sign on, and specifically to each piece. And we're doing that first by having community members learn about it and having them be the spokespeople for it to say, this is what we want, this is what our children deserve. And so we've just gone live. We're on Twitter at Platform for Youth, or platformforyouthjustice.org. We have a website. And we are doing a series of candidate forums online so that folks can learn about juvenile court judges who are elected here and where there are active races, and also our district attorney. We're going to have a new district attorney here in New Orleans, which is a big deal. A lot of the candidates are talking about their values and their policies, but we're really trying to drill down and see who's going to be held accountable and uphold this vision into the future. And I think what was really amazing was we started out with some, here are the policies we want changed. And very quickly we moved kind of broader and said, we want so much more than policy change. And I think the three main headings that we've created for the platform really speak to where we landed, that we wanted something more than just individual policy changes. And so those three categories, those three demands are: treat kids like kids, end the criminalization of Black youth, and prioritize healing over punishment. And so we're not just talking about what we don't want, we're talking about what we want for the children here in New Orleans. And we're hoping that really resonates with voters, and especially the communities most affected by our juvenile legal system here.
That sounds awesome. And I'd like to think those values are something that everybody can get behind. Treating kids like kids, ending the criminalization of Black youth, and healing over punishment. I think those are really important. Thanks for that. Following up on that question, I'm wondering what are some of the challenges that folks have experienced with getting youth justice on the minds of voters? How do you think we as a youth justice advocacy community can work to overcome those challenges? And this question is for anybody that wants to respond.
Oh, if I can jump in, I know one of the biggest challenges is, you know, when it comes to systemic fixes that are impactful and have long-term change that are going to improve the lives of young people and those directly impacted, a lot of times these changes they are either dense, nuanced, boring, not marketable. So one of the biggest challenges that we have, I know me specifically, is communicating things that aren't like sexy but are important, and you know, inspiring people and motivating them and lighting that fire to get them to go out and do something or be engaged or to sign something, like those different type of things. Whereas, like, you know, things that are very easy to understand or that are shock value or something that triggers them and angers them, those type of things tend to mobilize them quicker and inspire them to get involved. And sometimes, you know, it's a hard transition to get from those like, you know, police brutality videos to the systemic fixes that are actually going to change that, whether it's, you know, repealing the Bill of Rights, the police Bill of Rights, or, you know, looking at police unions and looking at like who they're funding or if that should even be allowed, like those different type of things. It's really hard to get, especially like when you're kind of competing with other movements who are kind of pushing the sound bites and the easy to quote things and not really moving the general public towards being engaged in the more nuanced and specific things that are going to lead to systemic change. So I guess basically marketing the importance and getting buy-in from the people to do something about the changes and the issues that aren't as sexy, aren't as marketable, and you can't really like understand with just like one video or one situation because it's so deeply ingrained and there's so many layers to it. But yeah, that right there is a huge problem that I've faced for about 10 years. So I was, even when everything was going on with George Floyd, I was like, this is too suspicious. Like, you know, it's too much. It's too many people right now. So like, yeah, that's
how sustainable is the levels of energy that people were putting into to everything. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, you know, trauma and emotions being really powerful and making sure that people can figure out a way to sustain that energy towards the more nuanced and more critical policy changes and systems changes that we really need to see in order to make sure things like that don't happen, right? I completely agree with that, Rashad. I appreciate you for bringing that up. Anybody else want to answer that question?
What was the question again? Can you? I'll go answer.
Yeah, long question. Yeah, just wondering, what are some of the challenges that folks have experienced with getting youth justice on the minds of voters? How do you think we as a youth justice advocacy community can work to overcome those challenges?
I think it's probably something that kind of like what Sophia said in the beginning. I think that a lot of people don't really think about any issues until it hits home. You know, kind of like COVID-19, people don't want to believe it. They ignore it until the family member gets COVID and then something tragic happens, right? It's the same with the system. You know, a lot of people don't care or really don't pay much attention because they don't have either indirect experience of it or don't really look at it. You know, they only see it from the media perspective or from a far distance, but never, you know, they've never had the proximity of it. So I think that that's the challenge that I see with certain people because I feel like in the movement, right, when you're trying to move people and in this issue or trying to change perspectives around this issue or I think that you could get those people, those same people, they already know what's up, but there's still people that don't understand this, don't understand that, you know, like people that don't understand that, look, a kid doesn't just rob or steal does this just because he was born and just did it. Like there's things that lead to it, and we just need to understand these things. And I think that it's even when you provide them with this information and the data, sometimes it's still hard for some people to really believe it. So I think that the challenge is that, you know, really bringing the issue to the people that really need to hear it. We're bringing it to the people that already heard it for many years, but we need to be able to start having dialogues with those that probably we don't want to have dialogues. But that's the way to move things sometimes. It's a strategy, you know, it's a political strategy. And a lot of people don't want to do that because we're caught up in the moment, in the feelings. So I think that that's the challenge in the movement and overall everything, that we are not strategic on how to approach the movement sometimes in some areas, you know, opening that door and stepping in there and taking over in that way, you know. So
yeah, I agree completely. I think that a lot of folks just don't think that it can be them or their kid until it is, right? They don't understand how quickly things can happen in these systems that we're either seeking to change or just completely deconstruct. And, you know, showing them how quickly things can happen and how things happen in these systems, I think is really important to getting people engaged and getting them caring about these issues and thinking about it more long-term and being really strategic about how to change things. So if anybody else wants to respond to that, I'll give one more second before we move on to the next question.
I'll add to it.
Awesome.
So
Thank you.
I think one of the issues is people don't take things serious enough. So they second guess if it can actually happen or not. And then when they see that it happens, they want to try and add input or stuff like that. So people wait until it's too late, or people don't feel it as much because they've never been able to relate to it. So I don't think people should so much focus on if it could happen to them or will happen to them. They need to step out of that and realize it's already happening. So I think it'd be like good to make people more aware and show them like it may not happen to you or it may not happen to your kids, but there's people that are in certain situations that they can't escape from. So, you know, when it happens and people take notice of it, it's already too late.
I agree completely. I think you shouldn't have to only have empathy just because it could happen to you, right? You should care about it no matter what. So thank you guys for adding that. I'm going to move on to the next question. Are folks working on any specific pieces of legislation that are looking to really focus on in 2021? Or is anybody working on anything specifically that they want to highlight or share with the group and with the audience? Specifically, yeah, I'm thinking of Rashad and Kit and Sophia.
Oh, you starting with me or you starting with Sophia?
Whoever wants to go first.
Sophia, you can go.
I could.
You could start.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the question was, what are we working on?
Any specific pieces of legislation that folks are working on or looking at focusing on for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Sophia talk about the local stuff that is at stake that we're working on, but some of the local stuff I'll add more. But I guess, yeah, I mean, obviously, we're continuing to, you know, we're really trying to figure out, we recently just had a policy team meeting in ARC earlier to talk about this. And one of the things that we have really been focusing on in the past years is been a lot around sentencing reform, right? Reforming, you know, sentencing reform, you know, people that have been in years they went in at 14 or 15 and they went in for 20 years, you know, we've been able to work on legislation that has cut things down, right? Or stuff like that. So it's resentencing. So one of the bills that will really help us get to where we're at today was SB 260. It was in 2000 and I don't know what year, I forgot, 17, 18. Or maybe 16, I think. We worked on that bill, which basically said that anybody under the age of 18 should, like, you know, basically be a youth, should have a youth for parole here. You know, if they behave, they do their time, they do what they're supposed to do, they get some time off. And, you know, that's only for people under the age of 18. And then after that, we went for another bill that went to 23 and under. And then after that, the next year we got greedy and we said 25 and under. So we managed to get everybody under the age of 25. They got convicted for life sentences as juveniles or whatever, you know, because of the brain development, right? So what we're trying to really get to is like, how can we bring this to the national level? How can we bring this type? Because I feel like, you know, we're trying to think of ways where we could make it like a national stuff, like a national campaign where we start, because, you know, when you look at other states like Louisiana, Kentucky, like Some of these people have to wait 30, 40 years to have their hearing, and it sucks. We could cut that down, and I feel like we need to we're trying to think of ways to get into that more. So that's something that we started a conversation recently around, but mainly I would say, just to keep it short because I don't want to take forever, it's we are really just focusing on the DJJ closure, what's going to happen with that, because even after you get all these victories, we got to monitor the implementations of it and whether if it's actually going to get done. LA County has moved forward to create its own alternative to youth prisons, all right? So once that report is done, we have to advocate to make sure that it's implemented next year and all of that, right, in the local level. Once youth out of probation move out of the new department and then a new department is recommended at the county level, we have to make sure that that department is funded actually well, and that actually the people that are working there are people that we want them to be there. So there's many little small things that we have to do in implementation phases of this work that we're doing right now. And also for Prop 17, if Proposition 17 passes, what does that mean? That means that 50,000 Californians are now going to be eligible to vote. So that means that we have to do voter engagement work, get people registered to vote for next year. I think that's what some of the things we're working on obviously on ending cash bail here. That's a very controversial issue in the state of California, but there's ways to get things done. And I think that the thing with that is that you could get the small piece of the pie now or the bigger pie in the future. And I look at the bigger pie in the future, that we're tackling the bail industry. That's the enemy, I would say, too. It's part of the system. So I think that trying to get more work around that, see how we're going to do that, because that's a little, it's a conflict. It's a little interest. It's a controversial issue. But other than that, we've done a lot of forums too with candidates in the past. We've done some in prisons. We did one in Lancaster State Prison. I don't know what prison it was, but we took some of the DAs who are running, because that's an important race in LA County. We have George Gascon and Jackie Lacey. I'm not endorsing nobody, by the way, so I don't endorse them. I'm just saying that those are the races that are happening. That's a very important race in LA County because we have the largest district office, right? We have some of the largest departments in the nation, and it's very important that our work next year also is about not only after November, once November happens, but it's to continue to educate people through our stories, through our narratives, through our newsletters, through our members, through everything, that letting people know that change is possible with the right resources, and that why is all of these things that we are doing, why are they important. So keep reiterating the message to people about hope, redemption, and the possible that we can change things, and I think that that's another thing that we're going to be doing. But yeah, sorry for taking forever.
Awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's all awesome. Rashad or Aaron, did you guys want to add anything?
I'll jump in. So we're going to be, every session is, supporting things that come out that make sense. And, as far as our mission, we look to address systemic issues of inequity. So, supporting things that come out of the Maryland the Maryland Youth Justice Coalition, the Coalition of Reform School Discipline. This session is going to be the People's Commission. A lot of these coalitions that we are active on, all of them I think we're active on. We're also every session looking to defend against things that don't make sense, that would make the issue worse. So, whether it's arming school police, which is something that we fought in the past, or any other crazy type of legislation that would come out. For us specifically, we've already found a sponsor, Delegate Pena Melnick. We have a bill that would make racism a public health crisis. It has 11 specific items under it. This has been done already in Cleveland, Ohio on the local level. They're looking at it on the state level for the state of Ohio. This has also been done on a local level in Montgomery County. And right now we're looking to do it on the state level because this makes a lot of sense. And this is something that, I've been kind of saying for years. I didn't make it, public health crisis, but I was like, we have to start looking at the public health impact and also how it contributes to systemic racism, right? Yeah. So with this bill specifically, you look at COVID, you look at how the government somewhat, changed focus, shifted resources, all those different type of things. racism is also a public health crisis, and this has been stated when people were protesting during George Floyd, and even elected officials have admitted this, right? So the resolution itself has 11 points. It's not too dense. I'm gonna read each point. So this is what it would do when it passes, right? So it would establish a glossary of terms and definitions concerning racism and health equity. Assert that racism, that's one. Number two is assert that racism is a public health crisis affecting our entire community. Number three, incorporate educational efforts to address and dismantle racism and expand understanding of racism and how racism affects individual and population health. Number four, promoting community engagement, actively engaging citizens on issues of racism and providing tools to engage actively and authentically with communities of color. Number five, committing to review all portions of the codified ordinances with a racial equity lens. Number six, committing to conduct all human resources, vendor selection, and grant management activities with a racial equity lens, including reviewing all internal policies and practices such as hiring, promotions, leaderships, appointment. That's huge. The next one is promoting racially equitable economic and workforce development practices, another good one. The next one is promoting and encouraging all policies that prioritize the health of people of color and support local, state, regional, and federal initiatives that advance efforts to dismantle systemic racism and mitigating exposure to adverse childhood experience and trauma. Training of all, this is all the same point, training of all elected officials, staff, funders, and grantees on workplace biases and how to mitigate them. The next one is partnering and building alliances with local organizations that have a legacy and track record of confronting racism. The next one is encouraging community partners and stakeholders in the education, employment, housing, and criminal justice system, and criminal justice and safety arenas to recognize racism as a public health crisis and to activate the above items. And then the last one would be securing adequate resources to successfully accomplish the above activities. So that's what we're working on. So we want to get that passed. And just like it was mentioned, the oversight, that's what happened. So that's this coming up this session, but it's something that's going to be long-term.
Awesome. That's super informative. I appreciate it. I think we've got one more question before we wrap up here. Jill, we've got NJDM members, allies, families, all watching, and hopefully we'll be watching. Hopefully we've recorded this, who've all been impacted by the youth justice system. We're a little over a month away from the election at this point. Obviously, we prepped for this before the weekend, and we learned some troubling news on Sunday, RIP to RBG, of course. But, is it too late for advocates to really get involved in the electoral advocacy around this election year, or is there something tangible that folks can still do?
Yeah, it's definitely not too late. And I think National Voter Registration Day is lifting that up. I mean, we've heard lots of really awesome stuff that NJJN members are doing. Forums, candidate forums, platforms for youth, all of that kind of stuff. And keep plugging into that. If you're not already doing it, find out who is, as I said at the beginning, and continue to do it. But I think for every member, what you should do is make sure you have a plan and 5 of your friends have a plan to vote. And I think especially in this COVID year, with all of these shenanigans, dare I say, around the post office and mail-in voting and absentee ballots, make sure you know the rules in your state so that you are able to register. There are a bunch of registration deadlines coming up in early October. So check it out and make sure you know, and then make sure you have a plan. And I know that that's hard. I know that that's like more planful, but there are obstacles, Ricky, as you have said, that are being put up every which way from Sunday, from all the way from the top down. And so it's really, really important that at a minimum, you and make sure 5 of your friends or your team or your whatever it is, have your plan and try to spread the word that way too. I think that's really the best way everyone can get prepared for sure at a minimum. And then, the toolkit lays out, and you've heard here, you have experts here, all the different ways you can raise the issue and whatever races are most important to you where you are. But I would just really emphasize the making sure you know what's what for October and November so that your voice is heard on election day.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. Are there any final thoughts from the group before we officially wrap up?
You're all awesome. I love hearing all the work going on across the country. It's fabulous.
It's nice to hear that. It's awesome. Anything from anybody? Okay. If so, just hop in, but I'm gonna wrap us up here. Thank you everyone for joining us today and having this conversation. Today is National Voter Registration Day, so we of course want to encourage folks to register to vote if you haven't already. And for the youth justice advocates out there, please go to Youth First website, nokidsinprison.org. Download that toolkit for youth justice and electoral advocacy. Check out the resources from Kentucky and our other members. It's a great starting point to figure out how to get involved in electoral advocacy. And remember, their elections happen every year, so there's a lot to do each year, not just presidential election years. And if we can sustain some of this energy and people can show up consistently for a few sessions, I think we can see some real change. So I want folks to really understand that too. Please stay connected with us here at NJJN on our website, njjn.org. Sign up for our email list. That's the best way to know what we're working on and what our members are working on. I want to say again, RIP to RBG. I want to plug Joran, who's going to be doing an IG live later today at 6 o'clock Eastern time. So please check out NJJN for that later on Instagram. North Carolina, I got to do something for North Carolina because I'm a North Carolina kid. October 15th is the early voting start date. So don't wait until election day to vote. You've got plenty of time to figure it out. So just want to make sure folks know that. And again, remember to show up beyond just November 3rd this year. It's important every year, even for the elections where there aren't huge issues like presidents on the ballot. So please just be mindful of that. And I want to thank everybody for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it, you guys. Thank you.